Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first 6 weeks of school conference series. My name is Michelle Benson, and I am the Chief Professional Learning Officer for Center for Responsive Schools. Tonight, I have with me Dr. Sheldon Berman, in which we're going to call him Shelly. Shelly, it is such an honor to be with you tonight and for you to join us and be part of our webinar series. I'm just going to share, just a little bit about you, to the audience, and then you can come in and share some other additional things about what you do. But Dr. Berman is a leading educational leader and published author. Dr. Berman is a AASA Lead Superintendent for SEL and long-standing collaborator for Center for Responsive Schools and working very closely with one of our programs, Responsive Classrooms. Dr. Berman will be joining us this summer in July at our conference, the first 6 weeks of school in Washington, D.C. He is one of our featured speakers as well as a concurrent session speaker this summer at our conference. Dr. Berman, let's take some time and let's have get to know each other a little bit more and just tell us, something up, a little bit more about you.
All right. Well, thank you. And it's wonderful to be here, Michelle. And thanks for the invitation here and thanks for the invitation to the conference. I'm very excited about both, actually. The kind of dialogue we'll have here just about implementation and responsive classroom, as well as the session at the conference where we'll dig really deeply into implementation. Now, just to give you some background about me, I started out as a social studies teacher. High school social studies teacher, actually, and in Maine and in Massachusetts. I went on to start an organization called Educators for Social Responsibility, which became Engaging Schools. I served as president of that for many years and then actually left what we called ESR to become a superintendent in Hudson, Massachusetts. And that was back in 1993. And I was a superintendent for 28 years that extended across a variety of districts. Hudson was a district of 3,000 students in suburban Massachusetts, although it was a very much of a working class community. I went on to be superintendent in Louisville, Kentucky with 100,000 students and 155 schools. And then from there to Eugene, Oregon with 16,000 students, just to experience the West Coast a bit. I retired at that point, but was asked to take on an interim superintendency back in Massachusetts for a year. And so I accepted that and was there for 5.5 years. So I couldn't seem to get out of the superintendency. And in two of those districts, actually, in both Hudson and in Andover, which was my last district, we implemented responsive classroom. And so I have just tremendous respect for responsive classroom. And just to share a little bit more about the history there, I actually remember when responsive classroom formed with Chip Wood leading that work back in the 80s and 90s. And so I would say that responsive classroom has just this rich history of experience. And, the work that you do is deeply invested in the well-being of students and in the sense of community it can create in schools and the sense of belonging that it can promote. So I just have tremendous respect for the work that you do.
Well, Shelley, you gave a really, long resume of your superintendency and just being, in various places. What are some of your motivations from that particular work within education that you pursued in education as a superintendent?
Sure. And actually, in every district that I was in, I pursued social emotional learning. And in two districts, obviously, I used responsive classroom. We supplemented it with a skills program. Fly 5 was not out at that time. So we used a number of different other programs that sort of went to supporting skills as well. But I have a deep belief that we need to create spaces and environments for students that are equitable, that are inclusive, that are responsive to their needs, and that when you create those kinds of spaces, students thrive and they do well. One of the things that I learned out of this work, actually, and I pursued a number of other areas of, whether it's special ed or innovations in technology. There's a variety of things that I worked on. But one of the things that I learned about programs in general is that that implementation was absolutely critical. How we implemented programs was a key to their success. And what I found is that in my own implementation of programs, I saw programs fail, and in part they failed because we did not invest the kind of resources in order to make them successful. And I saw the work that we had to do to ensure success in the programs that we supported. So it led me, actually, and one of the things I've been doing since retiring is I've been doing a lot of writing. I wrote a book on administrative ethics. People may not know, but I write a column in the superintendent's magazine, School Administrator, every week around ethics. And I've done that for 13 years now, almost 14 years. So I wrote a book on ethics. But the second book that I wrote, AASA contracted with me. I got a grant to really look at implementation. And they felt that there were a few superintendents who understood social emotional learning as deeply as I did. So they asked me to study implementation in 6 districts. And so we did a deep dive into a variety of districts. On the urban end, it was Cleveland and Virginia Beach. And on the more what I'd say mid-sized districts, it was Corvallis, Oregon, which is the site of the Oregon State University, and a much more diverse population. Naperville, Illinois, which is a wealthy community, fairly wealthy community. Marshalltown, Iowa, which is in the center of Iowa, 5,000 students in a rural district. That actually has a couple of plants that employ a lot of immigrants, actually. And then a small district, Moriarty, Edgewood in New Mexico, outside about 30 miles outside of Phoenix. Not outside of Phoenix, outside of Tucson. And so there were a variety of districts, and looking at all of them gave me some real insights into what worked and what didn't work. And I worked with them for about 18 months to watch what they were doing and report on what they were doing and assist at times. And then we wrote up case studies, and the book is now Implementing Social Emotional Learning. I think Kristen is going to post that in the chat for people to take a look at. But it really sort of synthesized the understandings that I brought to this work, as well as the understandings that emerged out of those 6 districts about what was important in terms of implementation.
Shelley, which is your response, it's leading me into the next question. Now, your book, it has a few themes in it. And one of the themes is teaching the skills is one thing, but you have to live the skills daily.
Right.
The second theme is professional development can be a transformative experience if done well. Mm-hmm. And then the last theme that I have here is the child is not the problem, the environment is. Therefore, creating a sense of community in a classroom is one of the highest leverages strategies for effective SEL implementation. And we're going to talk a little bit more within this webinar about SEL implementation. But I want you to just expand on any of those 3 things that I just named. And if there are others that I did not name, please expand on them. And then I want you to talk about how your research and your lived experience with these things can be shared with leaders.
Well, thank you. Actually, you just shared probably some of the most powerful understandings that emerge from that are embodied in the book. You know, the it's one thing, and I saw this in and let me describe a scene in one of the districts I visited. I went into these are third grade classrooms. I went in. I was touring with the superintendent and the assistant superintendent. We walked into a classroom, and the teacher had scheduled, had done a reading lesson. They put away the reading materials, and they said, "Okay, we're going to do our social emotional learning lesson now." And the lesson was a good lesson. It lasted for about 25 minutes, and then she said, "Okay, let's put that away, and now we're going to work on math." And what I saw was that this there was no connection between what the teacher had just taught in social emotional learning and what the classroom culture was like. That this was just another thing that they had to get done, and that the kids were just processing through it. We then went into another classroom, and the teacher turned to the class and said, "Would you tell Dr. Berman what it's like to be in this class?" And the students just poured out how they had a morning meeting. Every morning they had a closing meeting at the end of the day, that they helped each other and supported each other, that they worked together all the time. I mean, they were incredibly articulate. Interestingly enough, the assistant superintendent was totally surprised. She said, I didn't have, frankly, I wasn't aware that this teacher was doing such incredible work. And I didn't realize the contrast between these two teachers. Not that either teacher was bad in terms of academics. They had similar results in a way, but the kids had such a different attitude and had such a responsive to each other, responsive to the teacher. And so and they just went on for like 15 minutes talking about, I would ask questions like, "So tell me, what is an example of that?" And they'd say, "Well, we work in collaborative groups. In morning meeting, we get to talk about, who we are, and we get to learn everybody's name. And then we have these closing activities where we sort of think about what it is to, what a thought of the day, so to speak." It was, and they were incredibly precise about what they were sharing. And the teacher sat back and said nothing out of all of this. And and they showed me examples about the ways that they collaborated during the day. So what this teacher had actually created an environment where they were living the skills of collaboration, they were living the skills of community. They were able to share who they were. They felt safe. They felt like they belonged. And at one point, the teacher, near the end of this, teacher paused and said, "I absolutely love this class. And they saved my life this year." And she said, "My sister passed away of cancer. And in the last months, I had to tell them that I was going to see my sister. I shared that with them. And I have never had such a supportive group of students who cared deeply. They'd come in, I'd come back. And after my sister passed away, they sent me cards. They came in, gave me hugs. It was clear that she had a incredibly deep connection with these students, and they had an incredibly deep connection with her. So when I talk about, living the skills, that's what it's about. And one of the things that I've always seen about responsive classroom is that it is about the culture of the classroom. That responsive, the morning meetings, the class meetings, the closing meetings are all about building a sense of community, and it's all about engagement. And even when I go to districts and they ask me what to do, I say, whatever program you select, you have to have morning meeting. It is just essential. Even if you select something else, you have to have morning meeting because it is the way kids organize the day. When I was in Louisville and we did morning meetings, in all our elementary schools, I went into one and the the teacher, the principal actually said to me, this is changing the whole culture of our school. That kids really want to be here in the morning. We used to have a tardiness problem, and that is significantly diminished. This was a very much of a high poverty school. It just kids want to be there. They want to be there because they know each other and they care about each other. And so that's one. The other one, and so that leads into the issue of community. And I think one of the things that we don't realize is that many of our students don't have any experience of community. They don't know what it's like to be in a community. They may come from homes that are really disrupted or dysregulated. They may come from neighborhoods that are dysregulated and sometimes threatening. And school may be the only place where they get to feel safe and where they get to feel like they belong and where people care about each other. And that's the culture and frankly, responsive classroom is a key avenue for creating that space, that culture. And so the other one you asked about was professional development. And I'm going to spend a bit of time on it, if that's okay, Michelle.
Oh, that's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
We're having a conversation and you're filling up our chat. So continue to keep it going, Sheldon.
Oh, good.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I realized very quickly in my career is that being effective as a superintendent meant investing in my people, investing in the people in the district, that I had to see them as professionals. I had to respect their perspectives. I had to listen to what their concerns were and what the issues they were facing. This was not a top-down relationship in terms of the superintendency. This was a partnership. And it had to be a partnership with the people that I worked with, not only the administrators, but the teachers union, that it was critical that when there was an issue that I had to understand that issue. But one of the things that was even more critical was that the way to advance in terms of our academic performance or our performance in terms of any area that we worked in was investing in the professional capacity of our staff. And so that investment was essential. And what I found is that, particularly in the study that I had done, there were school districts and schools that say, and programs actually, that say, you can get our program with a 2-hour introduction and off you go. But social emotional learning is much more complex than that. And even doing things like responsive classroom, or morning meetings is much more complex. Just teacher language, just the focus on teacher language and how we talk to kids is complex, and how we support them. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of being an effective professional in work and social emotional learning. Or it could be in math, it could be in science, could be in any area, but it's the investment that we make that makes a difference. And what I find too often in the social emotional learning arena, and in many others, by the way, even in reading, the reading programs come in and do a presentation and say, we're going to do a 1 day, or we're going to do a 2-hour, and you're off. Reading, this is going to be easy for you. Go. You're an elementary teacher. You know how to teach reading. We won't assume that. So here's the program. If you have any questions, we have somebody who's a consultant you can reach out to, or some internal resource that you can go to. One of the things I most valued about the work in responsive classroom. And I say this without hesitation, is I think, the center has the best, most thorough, most comprehensive professional development in the field.
Thank you, Shelley. I
You
appreciate
know,
that. Yeah.
uh, and I'll tell a story here. When we start in Hudson, where my first school district, there was a grant that came out from the state that was a service learning grant. And it was a $20,000 grant. And I sent out a notice to teachers saying, if anybody was interested in doing a service learning project in their district, in their school, their classroom, just let me know. And we would divide up, many people, were interested. We would divide up the $20,000 and I distributed evenly among the group. Well, we ended up having about 20 or 25 teachers sign up to do something. And we worked on that for a couple of years. And then one of the teachers happened to say, I think we need more than service learning to help kids develop an ethic of caring and an ethic of responsibility. And so we had a committee, all the teachers met to talk about the work that we were doing. And they said, yeah, and actually this was before it was called social emotional learning, frankly.
Yeah.
It was, social skills instruction or
Right.
social development. It didn't have the label of social emotional learning until well into the 90s. And so I said, well, let's go see what programs are out there. And different teachers visited different schools that were doing different programs. And they came back and they selected, they talked to each other and they said, we'd like to go with responsive classroom. And I said, great. What do we need to do? And they said, well, the best thing is let's offer a summer institute, one of their summer institutes. And so I negotiated with responsive classroom to bring in an institute into the district. And it was filled immediately. And, it was a summer institute. I didn't pay anybody. I didn't have Hudson was a poor community. I didn't have the resources to pay for people's time. So I said, we'll give you the credits, as you do with the sessions. And then I said, the district will pay for the professional, to pay for responsive classroom to come in and do something in the district. Well, from that point on, the next year we offered not only RC1, but RC2, and had those completely filled. And the year after that, we had multiple sessions of RC1. And within about 5 years, we had 85% of our elementary faculty who had attended the RC trainings. And we had several people who are on tier 3 of being a trainer and being trained to be a trainer. And I never had to ask or advocate for anybody going. They said, when I would walk into classrooms, they would say, this has changed my teaching. And the same thing occurred when I went to Andover and we implemented responsive classroom. I remember walking into a second grade teacher's classroom after she had done the training. It was probably in October, and she had been maybe mid-October, and she'd been doing morning meetings. And she said, this has completely changed my teaching, and I will never go back. I absolutely love this. And so, and same thing in Andover. We didn't have the resources necessarily, although it was a wealthier district, to pay people for the summer, but we had people attend and fill the trainings because it just, and the professional development, because they found such value out of it. And, when teachers are saying that, that you're in the right place, doing the right work.
That's true.
And one of the districts that I studied, Virginia Beach, was a great example. Now they're a big district, there's 65,000 students, and I lost the number of schools, but they're probably about 80 schools, or maybe more. And the person, Angela Nichols, is the SEL coordinator there, and she started with responsive classroom. They implemented responsive classroom. She brought in some training, and now they have a responsive classroom academy, an in-house responsive classroom academy that offers training for teachers, that provides professional learning groups for teachers to come together who are working on the practice. They provide embedded professional development. The people who are now trainers provide embedded professional development to teachers, and they have a sustaining system that is successful. And that's what I think, the complement of high quality professional learning with embedded professional development is the right combination. But oftentimes we don't make that investment, and we think we can get it done with, here's a 2-hour training, go off and do it. By the way, the classrooms I described before, the two teachers, one teacher had downloaded the curriculum from the web and had done their 2-hour training. The other teacher had spent a lot of time working on some of the other elements of the program that were much more around community building, buddy programs and things like that. And that's what made it work.
Shelley, you said just a mouthful about just the pillars and the essence of responsive classroom. I was writing down, and just taking, a bunch of notes so I wouldn't forget, to just share a few things, to support what you're saying. And one of the things that I want to say is that you're still going to be proud of Virginia Beach. I was in Turner's Falls, Massachusetts this weekend, and we just certified 2 consulting teachers from Virginia Beach. So they are still very heavily invested in responsive classroom, as well as our organization, Center for Responsive Schools. I also want to, just say also that we're still filling up those Advertising Institute seats. And what you were expressing, how teachers are, said it is one of the best professional development opportunities they've been given. Is what we hear, every summer, whether we're at an institute or when we are actually going out into schools and providing, professional development for their faculty. And then just talking about, the pillars of RC and how, it seems like, that teacher that really, took the time to get to know her kids and took the time, for, to provide her, to give her students the opportunity for them to share their voice and to create a space of belonging for them. These are all the pillars, that responsive classroom teaches in our training. But most importantly, these are the essence of establishing and integrating SEL, into any, academic day, as well as academic instruction. And the last comment that I want to make is you're absolutely right when you're talking about SEL, that it's not a one size fit all, and it's also dynamic. It is forever changing, and it's forever changing because human growth and development is also forever changing. And so we have to, figure out ways that we can keep both the academics and SEL, alive in our classroom. And that is hard. That is one of the most challenging things that we are experiencing when we are observing classrooms and we're having conversations with teachers. Is, how do I, create this integration? How do I embed, SEL into my academic day? So, thank you for, for sharing that and talking about the professional development in which our professional development, whether it is with responsive classroom and or Fly 5, can do those things.
Mm-hmm.
So Shelley, tell us a little bit about, as we're thinking about your book and we're having more conversations about your book, how is your book unique and really supports, the conference, the first 6 weeks of school?
Well, actually, there are a couple things I want to add into this too. So I may divert from just that question, but but I think one of the things that I hope to achieve at the conference is to give people, there are more insights. In fact, there are about 12 insights that I share around what creates successful implementation. And I think it's really important that we think carefully about how we implement something so that we're not, so that it is a success. So whether we're doing the planning and the structuring to bring something in or to sustain something. One of the districts I worked with um, did brought in a social emotional learning program very early, and I visited it. Oh, maybe 12 or 14 years after it had gotten started, and they had trained new teachers coming into the district every year in the program, but they hadn't done any renewal of training after that. And so when I visited schools, some principals would say to me, "Oh, we're not doing that any longer. We're doing X because, the investment had not been there."
Mhm.
So it is about sustaining this work. And how do you sustain it, particularly in challenging times that we're having now? You asked, and so there's some other understandings that I want to provide that I think will be helpful to people. For example, you said early on one of the things that I mention in the book is that it's not about fixing kids; it's about fixing the environment. And too many of our programs, too many of the skills-based programs come with the attitude that we have broken kids and we need to fix them. They don't have the social skills, they have gaps in social skills, so we have to fix them. Now, to some degree, they do need to learn some of these skills, and that's an important piece of the work. But frankly, we have to create environments where kids live the skills. That's back to the very beginning of this. They have to live those kinds of skills. And so what I've come to see is that this work is about a shift in perspective. It's a shift from seeing that the students are the issue to seeing and pointing at students and seeing what I can do to help or fix students, to seeing, wait a second, how can I restructure my classroom? How can I bring different furniture in? How can I ensure that everybody hears in this classroom and there's sound enhancement? Or how can I provide an opportunity for a student to take a break, which frankly came out of responsive classrooms work, the space for students who are feeling like they need a break to take a break. So, I mean, literally that came out of the early work in responsive classroom, and the structuring of classrooms. So there are a variety of strategies that I think can come to play that, we won't have a chance to talk about here, but I hope to spin through those, yes, and one of, the other thing that I hope people see is that, and this is something I think, your organization believes in deeply, that depth is more important than scale. Let's get this right. Let's go deep. It's more important to go deep than to insist on everybody doing it. The work, the contagion around the work is really interesting because I never, as I said, in both districts, in both Hudson and Andover, where I implemented responsive classroom, I never had to encourage anybody. I never had to insist. I never had to ask about fidelity. Teachers were talking to each other about, "Oh, you did this in your classroom. That's I'm going to do that," and it was infectious. So it's that kind of culture. When you can create that kind of culture, and that's the exciting part about education, and that's the exciting part about being a professional. So, I just would say that hopefully at the conference I can convey that, and I can share with people some of the challenges as well, that are more challenging to overcome. So, for example, just let me give one example of that. The if you're trying to create a sense of community, that's one kind of discipline. because you want to bring kids back into the community. You want to restore them. You want to heal harm. You want to repair the damage that's done. You want to find ways that kids are not, alienated from their friends and alienated from others and seen as bad kids. They may make mistakes, but there has to be a way to bring them back in. And so what I've seen oftentimes is a real inconsistency between the kind of work around professional learning in terms of social emotional learning and the learning that is being done around discipline systems. And I've seen no tolerance policies at the same time that there's an attempt to promote, social emotional learning. The statements. So, if we're going to do inclusion, if we really want to be inclusive in our ways of being with kids and ways of being with adults, then we have to find ways of healing and repairing, mistakes that are made, and bringing people in and forgiving, in a sense. So policies like that. Now I have strong opinions about a number of these things. I have to say, I'm much more of I look for, intrinsic motivation and promoting intrinsic motivation. I think that's what community does rather than an extrinsic motivation. I think that there's, I have concerns about, for example, PBIS, because of particularly when there's sort of the token economy used and it's more extrinsic motivation. So that this is so what I hope to do is share some of these insights and some of the understandings.
Well, Shelley, I really appreciate you, being a part of this webinar and being open and honest and very candid, and also just providing us with your expertise around SEL, and also your expertise as a leader within so many districts that are doing wonderful, that are still carrying on the wonderful things around SEL. Many of the districts that you've named, that you've been in, that you did your research in, many of those districts are still very invested into SEL as well as responsive classroom. I do want to talk about one more thing, from your book, and it is avoiding roadblocks in SEL implementation within that process. And so what are some of the potholes and obstacles districts should be aware of when they're starting these SEL programs?
Well, the main pothole, as I would say, it goes back to the reverse of what makes it work. The main pothole is seeing it as a program and checking it off. I've done it. Too many of us as administrators, I just have to say, the district says the district wants an SEL program. They may give schools discretion about what program they choose. And so the principal looks around, has teachers pick a program, and he says, okay, we're done. Good, we got that program. And frankly, that happens all too often. And the lack of investment. So that's a tremendous roadblock. The other is, I think, goes to, in a way, the way we work with faculty, that they need to experience this themselves. One of the things that I was always struck by in the work we did with responsive classrooms is that our principals sort of ran their faculty meetings as if they were morning meetings. They always began with that kind of framework. And it really worked in a very powerful way to build a sense of community, that when you see that, leaders in a school district or leaders in a school are willing to actually do the kinds of caring things that teachers do with their kids, then it means that community is important, that voice is important, that presence is important, and engagement. I would say one of the other things that is an obstacle is sometimes the role that administration takes. And when administration isn't invested, when they're not informed, when haven't participated in the training and don't understand what is happening in classrooms and why teachers are doing the things that they're doing. The the when I was in Louisville, the superintendent who preceded me had a saying to principals, and his saying was, "You're only as good as your last year's test scores." Now, that created one of the most challenging cultures in schools because basically it reverted to test prep for almost 2 months before the tests were administered. And it wasn't, he abandoned the social emotional learning work the district had done prior to that. When I came back in and brought that back, it created so much energy and actually academic gains. So the attitude of leaders in a district really makes a difference. This is whether whether it's built into policy, whether they're advocating for it in the community, whether they're talking about it at school board meetings, whether it's part of the strategic plan. All of that is really important. But if none of that happens, if the administrators are detached or see it as, oh, that's somebody else's business, then it becomes a major roadblock when, the funding is challenged, or when there's politics around what the school is doing, and people accuse the administration of investing time in useless social emotional learning work rather than academic work. Don't see the value. Aaron Spence was the superintendent in Virginia Beach that launched the work in responsive classroom and social emotional learning. Now he's now in Loudoun County. But he, when the controversies emerged, he actually wrote an op-ed to the whole community in the newspaper, and then went to Chamber of Commerce, said the same thing. He basically said, we want all kids to feel safe. We want all kids to belong. We want all kids to be valued. We want all kids to be loved in our classrooms. Tell me that we don't agree. All of us agree that that's the conditions that we want in our schools. And he then realized that many people misunderstood what social emotional learning was. And so he actually came up with he had a graphics department. He came up with a graphic to show what it was and how it was playing out in classrooms. He took that to the Chamber of Commerce. He took it to other community groups. And he said, this is what it is. And people would say, oh, I didn't realize it. I didn't realize that's what it was. and that's what you're doing. We love it. Please continue doing more of it. But that's what I meant about, one of the vulnerabilities in this work, one of the obstacles is that we often we treat it as a checklist as administrators, and we don't really get invested. I mean, I remember doing the responsive classroom training, and I was pretty blown away by the, 4-day training. Actually, at that time it was 5 days.
Yeah, it was. We got it down to 3 now, Sheldon.
Oh, really?
Yeah. 3 days.
Well, hey, it's just those are just some of the obstacles that I think are really critical. And I know people, struggle. Every district is different. Every district has a different issue, and every school may have different issues. And it's important to, look at the approach that I've taken is one that what I would describe is it's systemic in nature, that we have to look at, are we creating a sense of community across in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools? Are we creating that? And now I know that the center has actually brought back its middle school program.
That's right.
And I know we implemented that middle school program in Hudson when I was there. and it was a pretty powerful program as well. Um, you know, there's, are we consistent at all levels? Are we building across all levels? Um, are we creating a sense of community at all levels? And how are we thinking about it? And then to think about skills. Are we refining students' skills? I mean, one of the things that happened, and this is, if I were back in and we were doing a responsive classroom, one of our teachers, one thing that when I was in Hudson, the teachers decided that they wanted a skills program, and the RC didn't have a skills program at the time, and so they did second step. They brought in second step, and they did second step lessons once a week, and on every Tuesday, because they wanted Mondays to be clean and only responsive classroom, only morning meeting. And so we extended morning meeting. Now, actually, you can have a blended program. You can do both the community building and the skills building with the work that you've done around Fly 5.
That's right.
So,
absolutely.
I loved it that on Tuesdays they would do this longer lesson that came out of second step, but now it could be a Fly 5 lesson, and then that extended throughout the rest of the week. But but it was part of morning meeting, part of a little bit of an extended morning meeting. So the skills is really critical, and then curricular integration is another piece of the work. And how you integrate that into the literacy that or the books that students are reading, the collaborative learning that they're doing in classrooms. And then finally, I'm a firm believer in service learning as a component of this, because I believe that we need to get students out into the world to show that, one, test their skills that they've learned, and also demonstrate the kind of people that they've become in a different setting. It's we talk about application. Service learning is the application of social emotional learning in the world. So I see those as 4 elements, and when you describe those to people, they go, "Oh, those are really wonderful elements." But it is thinking about those elements systemically. Are we doing that kind of work? And what do they do? What are we doing at each of the levels to enhance students' full experience? That's a lot. You don't do that initially. That's where you end up, actually.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Shelley, and for our guest tonight, Shelley is going to be at our conference, and he will be one of our featured speakers as well as our concurrent speakers. And so before we go into our Q&A sessions, Shelley, just tell us a little bit about what the attendees are going to get from you when they attend our conference.
You know what? Let me. There's a question that came up immediately after I said that, and that
yes, it is.
You named the 4 aspects. What I would say is there's community building, there's social skill development as part of that. And so you have to develop the culture first. Then you can work with the skills and teach the skills, and then they become in context. The third was integration into academics, and the fourth was service learning. But a long time now, this dates me, is probably about 10 years ago, I keynoted one of the conferences, one of the RC conferences. Yeah. And frankly, the energy at the conference is so exciting. The people who both are interested in responsive classroom and are coming to the conference to further their skills are just people who are deeply committed to this work. And it's wonderful to be in that kind of community. And I think that's, we don't often get a experience where we're part of something where we feel others just are so aligned with what we're doing, and we can learn from their work, and we can learn from the practices, and we can get more insights. And it's just exciting to be with people who care that deeply about the culture and the well-being of our kids, culture of our schools and the well-being of our kids. Mm-hmm. So what I think people will take away is a lot more insights, but also that same sense of community that, you create in classrooms with responsive classroom.
Well, we look forward to seeing you. We look forward to hearing from you. And also we look forward to you sharing your book with us. Kristen Benson has been in the back, so to speak, of our webinar and putting in links to several different things that Shelley had been talking about with our chat tonight. And so now Kristen is going to be the facilitator for our Q&A. So Kristen, are there any questions in the chat for Shelley?
Well, Shelley already caught the one about someone asking about the 4 aspects again. But if anyone does have any questions for Shelley, you can feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll pass them on. There were some great comments about people really connecting with what you had to say, Shelley, about morning meeting and having that training, having that responsive classroom training, and sort of reinforcing the idea that it's more than just a one and you're done, like that you really have to digest everything that you learn in the course, but then work on it and really improve it. It takes time. I'm sure you saw that in the districts that you worked in.
Yeah. Some of the comments are really wonderful, actually. I'm just looking at them for the first time. And, about just the need to refresh your skills. Christina Valenti's comment is just a really powerful comment. It said, even for me, I completed RC1 and I noticed I was forgetting my skills mid-year. And once I became more mindful of my language, it made a huge difference to the class dynamic. It is, by the way, 2 things that I have stolen from Irresponsive Classroom, and that you have, one of your principles is that the social curriculum is as important as the academic curriculum. And frankly, I say that in every presentation that I'm in, because I believe it's so true. But the nuances of your trainings are really important. And when you are things like teacher language, which very few people in social emotional learning even touch on, has been a part of your trainings for a long time. And there are other elements as well. Is it Eobi Goodyear? I don't know how to say your first name, but one of my 2nd grade boys absolutely looks forward to morning meeting. He told our behavior specialist that he loves share time and morning messages. Behavior is the best during our morning meetings. Absolutely.
So great. Of course. What a great way to start the day too. You're setting them up for success.
Yeah.
There is a question. Someone is interested if you could talk about behavior and the correlation with the lack of recess or the amount of recess that young learners should have. Getting our very young learners like kindergartners, 1st graders outside and having that element of recess.
Oh, I'm a firm believer in recess. I think it is absolutely essential that, and actually, I'm also a firm believer in movement in the classroom. Particularly young kids can't sit still, whether it's moving from center to center or, having different activities where you take a break and you engage in a short movement activity or getting outside and having a chance to play. I've also seen that there's a variety of, now I don't, and maybe it's been a while, so you may be doing this as well, but there were a variety of organizations that actually looked at how to create really responsive recesses, in essence. Experience a recess that were really inclusive experiences, and how to look at games that were more inclusive and teach kids more inclusive ways of being on the playground. But I think it is absolutely essential. I just went to a school actually last Friday that was really impressive. And they had a little buddy bench that was there, and they talked about how important they did actually for all K-5, a morning recess and an afternoon recess, and then a little time after lunch.
That's great.
So, they were devoting a lot of time and felt that it made a difference
Mhm.
in students' ability to concentrate.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, what a great place to naturally practice the skill building that's happening in the classroom. So, like you said, you can take time out of the day and do that social emotional learning lesson, but then you've got to put it into practice and recess. It all comes together at recess, right?
In cafeteria.
Yep, in the cafeteria. Yep.
And those are the topics for morning meeting too, when problems emerge. I mean, not more class meetings when
Class
problems.
meetings. Yep.
Yeah, and that's a structure that I think is also critically important. We didn't talk much about it, but it is a chance for students to have voice and agency in the classroom. So those kinds of the morning meeting, class meetings. I happen to absolutely love closing meetings. And I would say that, we implemented those in Andover, and kids would gather all their things, get all their books. Then the teacher would say what the question was for the closing meeting in the morning. Said, I'm going to ask you at the end of the day, to point out where somebody helped another student in the class today. And then they would gather all their stuff, get their coats, be ready for dismissal. And they'd all sit around in a circle, and she'd say, who has something to share? And they'd share. And then they'd be dismissed after, not every kid had to share, but they'd be dismissed, and off they would go. But they went with a sense of closure to the day, and they went quietly to the bus, which I know is rarity. I mean, in most schools, it's like you have to, teachers are out in the hall saying, slow down, slow down, slow down. But after you do that, kids get quiet. It's a mindfulness activity in a sense. So that's all part of building community. That's all key parts of it.
Beginning, middle, and end of the day. It happens all day long, right?
Yeah.
Someone's asking about recommendations for funding the training, and I know there's so many avenues for that.
Yeah, you may be able to say more, but frankly, this is my bias. I think school districts should just pay for it. It is worth its weight in results.
Yeah.
And that it isn't, frankly, it's not all that expensive. I mean, in the larger context of things, this is not something that is going to break any district. And we pay a lot more for many other things.
Right. And I do feel like school districts that implement responsive classroom fully, it touches on so many aspects of teaching and learning that you would need individual trainings for. So it touches on behavior, it touches on, skill development, it touches on academic learning. It just touches on so much of the school day, and you can get it in one training rather than bringing in different experts for every little piece and subject that you're teaching.
Yeah, and it resolves some of those discipline and behavior issues.
Yes.
In a much more positive way. I mean, it doesn't eliminate everything. That's really
it's not a magic wand.
not a magic wand or panacea. It's just but it changes the work we do dramatically.
And I think it changes the teacher, and the teacher becomes much better at providing an environment where everyone can thrive, including themselves.
Yeah, if I were to share one, I know we're reaching.
Yeah, you can end with a story.
One of the things been talked about is adult social emotional learning, and our investment in adult social emotional learning. And I think the best adult social emotional learning is to have a classroom that you feel wonderful going into, and where you feel deeply connected to the students that are in that classroom. And that's the daily resource that we have when we create that sense of community. It isn't only about challenge. It's that you are a welcome part of this as well.
Kristen, there is one more question that popped up.
Yep, I do see that. And it's tips on helping to welcome back and helping students reconcile with each other. So I think it's maybe about, having to leave the classroom and coming back, starting anew.
Yeah. You mean after maybe a discipline issue or
I think so. Yeah.
not just vacations or other things like that?
Yeah. No, I think it's more about, having to leave and yeah, for discipline.
I think there's honest conversations to be had, and honest conversations about, we want to welcome, with the class, we want to welcome the student back, but also with the student about what they can say when they come back and what they can share. And, in general, when there's a conflict or a fight, or, and it's resolved, and people, and there's some healing that has happened, people can talk about it, and can talk about, here's where I was and here's what I learned, or here's where I am now. And other people can, there's a big piece of our work that's really about forgiveness, and has to be about forgiveness. And that's important for kids to learn also. So I've got a barky dog in the background. I hope I didn't use it.
No, that's okay.
Well, Shelley, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to the folks in the webinar that took the time out this afternoon to be with us, and to be able to learn more, and get to know Dr. Berman a little bit more, and to see how he's going to ignite the first 6 weeks of school conference this July 9th through the 11th in Washington, D.C. at the Washington Hilton Hotel. We hope to see you there, this summer. And I just want to tell everyone again, thank you for being with us tonight. And again, thank you, Dr. Berman. Shelley, for joining with us. Thank you, Kristen, for helping facilitate this entire webinar, as well as the questions. You all have a good night.